Hi. Well, it's awfully late in the day, isn't it? This is Let's Talk About Myths, baby, and I am that host of yours. She who got stuck at the opposite end of the second biggest country in the world the other day because snow. I am your host, Liv, here with today's very late, but hey, it's here, episode. So I'm just going to explain a little bit because, frankly, it was really cool and annoying. So I traveled to Halifax last weekend I traveled to Halifax for the first time in my life in the end of January into February, which was a choice that I made. And I did it explicitly because the two actors who play Merry and Pippin in The Lord of the Rings were doing the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead together in Halifax. And I was not going to miss that happening in my country. But then a storm hit and they got like 6 feet of snow and I got stuck like an extra day and a half, which totally threw off everything. But honestly, anything for Merry and Pippin, it was totally worth it. But here I am throwing this episode together on Tuesday morning. But you know what? It's kind of refreshed me. Like I feel in a much better place than I have been. So we are absolutely going with it. So I had this plan for today's episode. See, I have been doing this for going on 7 years, and I couldn't possibly love Greek mythology more than I do now. And that's, probably a lie because when I started this podcast, I would have said the same thing, but I just feel like it's truer now. When you spend 7 years learning every possible thing, and yet gods know there's still more, like the love, it just keeps growing. And that's how I'm introducing today's utterly different episode because I just decided to play around with an idea. So we're going to go with it and I want to hear from you all what you think. So as you've all heard in recent episodes, I've been going through a time and For All This Job is the coolest and absolutely greatest thing to ever happen to me. The thing that can make it difficult is needing to put out content every week and having that content rely entirely on my own ability to be like not horrifically sad. I have to research and then write 5,000 words of me being funny or smart or just, not what I feel now, which is kind of dead inside. Anyway, and because I feel dead inside, I wanted to find a way of sort of renewing and refreshing my love for this stuff. And when I think about the history of the podcast, and how I might say revisit something that I've already talked about, something that I just love so purely and completely, I think back to the earliest days of the show and how I just dove right into this thing head first, just deciding I would figure it out as I go. I talk a lot about the first episode and how I wish it was better, or at least, gave a better idea as to what the show would go on to become now and what I am so proud of now, which is very different from the first episode, but it doesn't, devalue the first episode. You all love it, and I love you for that. And so I thought, instead of thinking how it's not the greatest representation of my knowledge or the show currently, like maybe I look back on it in a cherishing kind of way. So today's episode is a love letter to the earliest days of the podcast, to the Liv who just wanted to talk about Greek myth because her life felt out of control. Familiar, and starting a podcast out of the sheer love of it was just something that I could control. If I could go back in time and tell her that nearly 7 years later this would be her entire job and that I would have made a name for myself as an expert in myth, have written books, have more on the way, and got to just spend all of my days loving Greek mythology with hundreds of thousands of people, like I don't even know if I could have begin to convince 7 years ago me that was even possible. Because when I started the show, I felt like I'd kind of like watch my dreams go up in flames career-wise, and instead I got new dreams and much better dreams. And then I guess I just made them happen. This episode is as much for me as it is for you. I need to feel something good to remember the parts of my life that are amazing, in large part thanks to you all and your abiding love of this first episode of the podcast. And no, we're not replaying it. We're gonna revisit it together in detail and see how it goes. is episode 247. You can learn all Greek myth has to offer, and the father still devours his son. Hello, and welcome to the first time I sit in a room with my cat and a microphone. My name is Liv. I'm completely obsessed with mythology. I have a totally useless Bachelor's of Arts in Classical Civilizations that basically has prepared me for this and only this. And so here I go. All right, I don't know about you guys, but this is fun already. Did I have trouble with the first things I said? Absolutely. Went back and forth. I'm keeping it in. But I'm not going to make this episode all about me, but it is quite special. To explain, I have not listened to this episode in 7 years. I just haven't. And so it's very brand new for me in a way that's incredibly fun. And it's fun to hear myself describe my BA in classical studies as useless, because it's a little bit ironic now. But to hear back on me starting this just because I felt like it is a really big thrill. This is the first episode of my podcast where I talk to you bluntly about Greek myths. I'm talking, let's address how completely crazy some of these things are. Let's address how awful the men treated the women. Let's address how completely bananas some of these ideas were that really an entire ancient culture believed was the honest-to-God truth. So this is Let's Talk About Myths, baby. So one thing that I hear from reviews fairly often, granted, only in the handful of bad ones that I do get, but those are the ones that, of course, stick in my brain because anxiety. But is this idea that I didn't start out feminist and that it, became feminist over time. So hearing myself, literally introduce the entire podcast project goal with how badly the men treated the women, let's get a grip, angry dudes who review this podcast, because I have been very upfront from the start. And then that last bit I said as well, that's a great example of why I wanted to do this episode, because I would love to look a little deeper at some of the things I said 7 years ago while I had the knowledge of Greek myth broadly, I lacked a lot of the context that I have now, and that context I think makes an enormous difference. And that's what I want to talk about today. So this idea that the ancient Greek people believed this to be true, the story of the gods. That's probably not an accurate statement. There was maybe a time when they believed it to be something like the truth, but I don't think that they were out there really understanding the world, in line with the mythology in the way that we think about it. It's much more of that sort of conceptual idea. And, we are talking 1,000 years worth of mythology. So in the earliest times, they were probably more likely to believe that what this theogony is about to tell us, that it was in some way divinely true. And as time goes on and they develop all of this knowledge about the planet and the world itself, obviously, they are believing less about the inherent truth of the divine creation story that they have, and it becomes more of a cultural idea than an inherent truth. It doesn't change its importance mythologically or culturally. It just sort of gives us a better understanding on how these people are changing as the stories are changing and just sort of what these things are becoming. Because as I like to remind you, but I really didn't conceptualize it myself even fully in the same way 7 years ago, but there is 1,000 years worth of cultural evolution packed into the mythology and the sources that we have it now. Just imagine everything that has changed in our world in the last 1,000 years. 1,000, right? The changes that humanity goes through in that amount of time are so enormous that we can't imagine this to all be one thing or one belief system or one anything, really. We have to look at it as these people evolving and changing over time and understanding their stories in different ways and how that affects them, as real people.
Where better to start this first episode than with a rundown of how it all began? Ancient Greek creationism, if you will. The ancient Greek world began with chaos. It was the first thing to exist, sort of a semi-sentient nothingness. And from chaos came Gaia, who was the personification of Earth. Gaia created herself a companion, who's named Uranus, and he is the sky and the universe itself. So Gaia and Uranus, the Earth and the sky, they got together and they had a slew of kids. These children are collectively called the Titans. I won't name them all individually because there are 12, and it would really just be a lot of nonsensical Greek names that you'll rarely, if ever, hear again.
Oh, past live. How naive and silly you were to think that you would not devote the next 7 years of your life talking about these very individual titans. Maybe not all of them, but gods, most of them. So since I didn't do that last time or, 7 years ago, let's look at who those were that I didn't want to name. So we have Kronos, obviously. He's the big guy. We'll get to him. Then there's Chios, who, fine, we rarely hear of again. Iapetos, he's the father of Prometheus and Epimetheus, so big name right there. Hyperion, father of Helios the sun. He doesn't do much himself, but Helios does. Oceanus, big name in fresh water. There's, of course, Rhea. We're getting to her. Thea, mother of the sun. Phoebe, mother of Leto, and therefore grandmother to Apollo and Artemis. There is Mnemosyne, mother of the Muses. Themis, mother of the Fates. And Tethys, mother of, gods. So many water deities. Tethys is so cool.
For now, we'll go with our main two titans, those whose story this really is. They're Rhea, who's another Mother Earth type figure, though she's less the Earth itself than her mother Gaia is. And Kronos, who is just a badass motherfucker and all-around lunatic.
All right, now for all I no longer use the word lunatic because I have learned to be better. It's not untrue when it comes to Kronos, and I do respect that even in those earliest days, I was able to, respect the man for what he's worth. Call him a badass motherfucker. I mean, unlike Oedipus, he is not a motherfucker, but, what's a bad name we could call him based on what he does? He's a badass father slayer. That makes him sound too cool, but it's true.
Gaia and Uranus also conceived a number of monster breed children in their time together, which they apparently had quite a lot of. The monster children are called the Hecatonchires and the Cyclops, and there were 3 of each of them. The Hecatonchires are 3 giants, who each have 50 heads and 100 hands. Just picture this. I mean, how does that even work? Not to mention, though, what an amazing word. Hecatonchires. I could say it forever.
Honestly, the amount that I have evolved as a person, as a scholar, as a mythologist, as the, intelligent, respected person that I am now, as much as I have grown, I will never not love just saying the word Hecatonchires out loud. Heka, 100, Kyries, hands. Just they are called the 100-handers. The badassery. It has never dimmed in my mind.
And the Cyclops, who are, as you might imagine, Cyclops. They're one-eyed badasses known primarily for causing trouble for Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey. And more on them later.
This is a great time to add a little bit more depth to what I said in that early episode. Yes, the Cyclops are arguably most famous for that specific Cyclops, Polyphemus, who fucks with Odysseus, or rather Odysseus fucks with him. It's a mutual fucking with. They might be most famous for Polyphemus, but in fact there are a number of sort of conceptual ideas of Cyclops. These earliest 3 who are born of Gaia do not necessarily include someone like Polyphemus. This isn't really because we have other ones who were specifically born in other ways. It's more just about how sources interact with each other. Homer and Hesiod are, we might be able to call them contemporaries. That's probably not super factual. But they are both from a very early time when it comes to surviving sources. Homer's conceptual poetry, you know, as the concept that is Homer, as in he wasn't a real person, those pieces are probably older than Hesiod, but they also probably didn't interact like a ton. They have a lot of discrepancies between the two, not to mention that just the Iliad and the Odyssey have a shit ton of discrepancies in a way that I find that incredibly satisfying, and anyone who says that Homer is one author is utterly absurd. But I digress. The point is that the Cyclops that are created in this kind of way are more considered to be the Cyclops who tend to, I suppose, mostly work with Hephaestus, helping him in his forge, but also, very specifically, they are known as the Cyclops who create Zeus's thunderbolts once Zeus is in existence. But they're a little less connected to this idea of Polyphemus as like a named character-based Cyclops. Cyclops, of course, just means one eye. So they don't always have to be the same, type of creature, or even just a group or anything. They're just people with one eye.
Back to our friend Kronos, who we're told is destined to overthrow his father, Uranus. And boy does he. Kronos envies his father from the start. Uranus is the ruler of the universe. He essentially is the sky and the universe itself in the same way that Gaia is the earth. And Uranus is kind of a dick.
Love the understatement. Past live. Absolutely love it.
See, he hides his and Gaia's monster children away. He hides them in Tartarus, which is this weird concept that is at once the darkest, most awful depths of the underworld, and, well, a god/monster of some kind. It's basically all the definitions of a noun. It's a person, place, and a thing. Tartarus. Frankly, I think he'd be pretty fun at parties.
I'm not trying to spend this time laughing at my own jokes, but I do still love describing Tartarus as all the definitions of a noun. Now, how accurate that is, it really is a place, but it is a place in the way that, the river Styx is a place, I believe. It is kind of also conceptually a divinity, but Tartarus is just, gods, it's so interesting. There's just so much to it. There is, it is the darker part of the underworld itself. Of course, the conceptualizing of the underworld is not one succinct thing, just like even where the monster children are hidden is not necessarily always certain. And then, of course, there are wars and things change. Are they under mountains? And that's why the mountains are volcanoes, not quite mountains, or any such thing. There's always so many different places where these creatures and gods later, where they are, either born or grow up or are imprisoned. And that's because there are so many different stories coming from so many different regions that every region kind of wanted to have their hand, in the honeypot of Greek mythology. It's like how there are 3 or 4 different mountains where some version of a story will say that Zeus grew up. There's one on Crete, there's one on Naxos. I am certain there are more. It goes the same for mountains associated with Dionysus's childhood. There are just always so many different places that want to be associated with certain divinities and concepts, and it doesn't make any version more correct than another. It's just all about the fact that, ancient Greece was not a unified place. They didn't even have a unified language. They shared a lot of cultural things and a lot of cultural stories, and that is why they're connected. And of course, they are connected now, and thus we put them all into one basket now. But they were just this broad collection of regions and city-states, and some more concerned with writing things down, some more concerned with being involved in the mythology. Everyone was really different, and so we get these vastly different versions of stories and concepts and kind of where anyone is.
So this imprisonment makes Gaia angry for obvious reasons, and ultimately she colludes with Kronos on how to punish Uranus.
If I recall, there used to be a Trump joke in here because this was recorded during the first year of his presidency. And then a couple people complained about it being political, and I was so worried back in the day about, people enjoying the show that I cut it out. But, happy to say that I probably made a shitty joke about Trump colluding on some such thing in the original version of this.
Apparently she tried to rope a number of her other Titan children into helping overthrow Uranus, but Kronos is the only one crazy enough to actually go along with his mother. Gaia gives him a sickle, which is that super scary knife thing that old-timey farmers use to cut hay, I guess. I'm not a farmer. Or, more famously, it's what the hooded figure of death carries around. Very ominous.
Oh my god, so much to say about the sickle. So, one, love hearing the origin of my not a farmer joke. Sometimes I say things and I don't even remember where they came from. It's not even a good joke. But two, Kronos having this sickle and my connecting it with this figure of death are not unrelated concepts. I've talked about it a little bit before, but, you know, there are two different deities called Kronos in the broad concept of Greek mythology. There is Kronos with a K, this Kronos, you know, who is the father of those original Olympians, and then there is Kronos with a CH. Of course, this is a key letter in Greek mythology, or in Greek. It looks like an X in English. We put it as CH, which makes more of like a Kronos kind of vibe. It is where we get CH as a kind of K sound instead of a ch sound, and now I'm going into etymology. My point is simply that at some point in the world, so Kronos, you know, with a CH, is a deity from Orphic tradition, not traditional Greek mythology, but Orphic became kind of popular, and so at some point the two Kronoses got kind of squished together, and then I think they also got conflated with the Roman Saturn, who, though he had similar origins, because of the origins, you know, of some Greek, or the Roman mythology having some Greek origins, but the Roman Saturn was quite different, and he was very associated with the harvest in a way that Greek Kronos wasn't really, and so then we get the sickle in, and then we get this conflation with Kronos of a CH, who was a god of time. And then we get Father Time having a sickle, and I can only assume that that then leads to the concept of death having a sickle, because what if is time, if not also death?
And I guess Gaia just tells Kronos to go for it. Kronos then sneaks up on his father, and he uses the sickle to castrate him. We don't even know if he actually kills Uranus. Literally, the number one part of the story is that Kronos castrates Uranus. Kronos then tosses his father's important bits into the sea, and they fly. As they fly across, Uranus's precious parts spatter blood on the land, and finally they land in the sea, which causes a foam to bubble up. It's really pleasant. We're told that from the blood spatter on the land are born the Gigantes, who are a race of giants, and the Urenaways, who are better known as the Furies. The Furies are women. It's never totally clear how many there are. We go with 3, I think, most often. And they're deities of vengeance. Basically, if you do anything requiring major punishment, they're there to serve it up. And they're pretty hardcore. They appear most often in Greek plays featuring kids killing their parents, a common theme, or the reverse, equally common. Depending where you get your information, the Urenaways are described as crones with snakes for hair, or with dogs' heads, or bat wings and bloodshot eyes. Basically, they're not ladies you want hounding you. And that's completely aside from the fact that they're straight up born from blood spatter.
I am so enjoying this, actually. Really, like, I just never listen to my own voice back, like, obviously, because it makes me cringe most of the time. But listening back to this is so much fun. And listening to how I told this story, you know, the Furies they hold such a special place in my heart because they're fucking fascinating. But I also love, you know, that I mentioned this idea of them being crones. And I'm so curious where I got that from. I'm certain it's a modern source, because, you know, it is part of this tradition of, like, taking monstrous female deities like the Furies and making them grosser. And to men, to the patriarchy, what is the grossest thing that a woman can be? It's old. The grossest thing a woman can be is old. And so they make them crones. Whereas if you look at depictions in artwork, they are not old. They're not. They're young and vibrant, like with their snakes either in their hair or like usually wrapped around them. They'll have like a viper belt and they'll have them like twining their arms. Like the Furies are fucking badass. And there's nothing not badass about an older woman either. But this idea of making them crones, of course, like is such a specific usage. And there is no way in hell that it was not invented by a man just for like the fucking sake of it. Like even the Grey Eye, those three women who I might or may not mention this episode, I don't remember, but you know, honestly, they serve almost no purpose except for giving directions as to where Medusa lives, but they, you know, notoriously share an eye and a tooth. It's where the, you know, Disney's Hercules fates come from. They've conflated the fates with the Grey Eye in that. But the Grey Eye are not described, I don't believe, in any ancient sources as being old, as being, you know, crones, but they are gray. They are described as being gray-haired. Sometimes they are also likened to swans, which is really interesting. But then, of course, you know, the men interpreting these stories, the patriarchal nature of where and how the stories are being interpreted means that if a woman is described as gray, she must be a crone. And then we get, again, this negative connotation that isn't really there in the traditional sources. It doesn't matter whether they're young or old, they're just gray. They don't have to be one or the other. And certainly, even if they are old, they are not being described as old in any kind of gross way. But culture has made them that way, and it's just so utterly dark and fascinating.
And that's not all the act of castration can create in the world of ancient myth. Like I mentioned, a sea foam erupted from where Uranus's bits actually landed, and from that foam, our girl Aphrodite was born. That's right, the goddess of love, beauty, desire, pleasure, and procreation was born from the sea foam of castrated man parts. It's romantic, isn't it? Just picture that classic painting, Botticelli's The Birth of Venus, Aphrodite, or Venus in the Roman, looking all angelic in her clamshell. She's surrounded by beautiful figures. The sea is the backdrop. That clamshell is floating on top of castration foam. If you look up Cronus' descendants on Wikipedia, Aphrodite is literally listed under Uranus's genitals. And it's origin stories like this that make me want to talk about Greek myths just all the time. Who came up with that?
And again, some things never change. That is still one of my favorite origin stories. It is still one of the things I like to talk about most. Castration foam has become iconic in my own mind, if not in some of yours also. And it remains perfect. This like sort of alternate version where Aphrodite is the daughter of Zeus and a Titan, Dione, is like such a fucking bummer. Like it's so unnecessary. Like nah. She is born of Uranos's castration foam, or the family tree on Wikipedia, as it says, his genitals. Not born of him or, you know, a mother of any kind. Castrated genitals only.
After Kronos overthrows Uranus, he re-imprisons the Hecatonchires and the Cyclops in Tartarus. This time, he has a dragon guard them, essentially making himself even more restricted than Uranus was. So, obviously, Gaia's feeling pretty psyched with her decision to help Kronos castrate and overthrow her partner. At this point, Kronos is ruling the world, and now he and Rhea get together, because in the beginning of time, what can you really do but hook up with your siblings? I say this as if this is the only time it happens. It isn't. Greek myth is full of it.
This is so true. And I do want to clarify, because somebody recently asked me this in one of the recent Q&A episodes. You know, there is so much incest in Greek mythology. It is always, well, not always. It is primarily brother-sister, not exclusively. And they asked whether that kind of translated to any belief systems amongst actual ancient Greek people. And while I, have not read studies on this specifically, I think I can pretty confidently say no. They did recognize that incest was bad, both morally and scientifically, biologically rather. But really what it is this kind of idea that the gods are, so they are human and then they are not human. So while there's a hell of a lot of incest, it just doesn't count as incest because they're divinities. It's just not the same. They are not biologically, having any of the same issues that humans would. And also, and this is where it all kind of begins, is simply this, what I've just said on the original episode, they are the only ones. If you are one of the first deities on this planet, like, who else can you fuck but your sibling? And so it just has to be okay. It has to be different from humanity, thankfully.
Rhea and Kronos, like their parents before them, also have a slew of kids. But Kronos has learned that one of his children is destined to overthrow him just as he had his own father.
So many destinies. So many, this generation of fathers and sons who are all destined to overthrow one another. And what's really interesting is that, what I'm about to get to in this is that Zeus is going to be sort of the one who breaks this ongoing curse, kind of, right? That this idea that the fathers are always going to overthrow the sons in this line. But in a recent conversation, and by recent I do mean like a few months ago, but time is a flat circle, I had with Maciej Przeprowski, we talked about this, and one thing I had never really clocked is this idea that like Apollo would have been the one to carry that on. And so, what are those things about Apollo that are kind of, we can see as Zeus preventing that from happening? I'm going to forget the details, but go back and listen to that conversation because, one, it was 2 parts because it was just so fucking good. But we really talked about the gods in terms of these like really technical and really fascinating, like almost scientifically looking at the gods. And it was so incredible. And one of the few conversations I get to have that it was like so heavily based in the really broad nature of Greek mythology and what it means and doesn't mean. And anyway, it's all I can think about. And yet I don't have details to provide you with. So go listen.
This does not jibe with Kronos, but his solution is not to stop having children because, spoilers, ancient Greek gods are horny, like, all the time, but instead his solution is just to eat all his children, therefore solving the problem entirely. Just easy peasy. So Rhea's popping out kids, just god after god after god, Poseidon and Hades and Hera and Demeter and Hestia, and they're all being swallowed up by Kronos. Finally, Rhea gets sick of her husband eating their children, who wouldn't, and she devises a plan. When Rhea gives birth to their next child, instead of giving him to Kronos, because I guess before she'd just been handing him all their kids to eat, and this time she gives him a rock that's all wrapped up as if it's a baby, which he promptly consumes. This child she manages to save is none other than Zeus, future king of the gods. Rhea hides him on the island of Crete, where he's raised in a cave on Mount Ida by any number of random people or things, depending which version of the myth you read.
Or it's Mount Zas, I think, on Naxos. There's like a whole cave you can visit there that is, apparently the mythological birthplace of Zeus. The Crete, Mount Ida, is a little bit more famous, I think, but Naxos is my favorite, so it deserves the mention.
The point is, Zeus grows up to be old enough and strong enough to finally overthrow his father, Kronos, bringing truth to the prophecy. This is something that happens time and time again in mythology. If there's a prophecy, there is no point in trying to fight it because it will inevitably come true one way or the other. When Zeus is old enough, he sets out to take revenge on his father. It's pretty valid, if you ask me, avenging your siblings, which your father has been eating uncontrollably for your entire life. Zeus forces Kronos to expel his siblings, the gods. Whether this means that Zeus simply hits Kronos really hard on the back and out pop a bunch of full-grown gods, or whether Zeus slices him up all gory-like is not clear. The former is unlikely, sure, but wouldn't it be a great visual?
I'd fully forgotten that I say that. And yes, past live. That would be a great visual. I just love the idea that like this really epic thing that Zeus is going to be known for the rest of all time, that is not really said in any detail, is that he just like hit Kronos on the back really hard and he just kind of like threw up 5 children.
The point is, now Zeus has his siblings back, and they are the gods Poseidon, Hades, Hera, Demeter, and Hestia, and they are all pretty pissed.
Now, one thing I didn't mention in this, I hope I'm not about to say it, in which case disregard everything I'm about to say, but one thing I didn't mention in this, 7 years ago version is that what this actually means from a mythological standpoint is that both Zeus and Hestia serve as being the oldest and the youngest of the children. Like, so Hestia was born first and therefore swallowed first, and Zeus was born last but never swallowed at all. And when the children are being thrown up by Kronos in whatever way, they are thrown up in the reverse order rather, of their birth, which means Hestia is the one who comes out last. And because of that, she is oldest and youngest, and Zeus is oldest and youngest, and they both play this role in really interesting ways. Like, Zeus obviously holds on to the idea that he is the oldest. Like, if you're to go up to Zeus and you're like, technically you're the youngest, he'd be like, abso-fucking-lutely not. Like, we don't talk about that. You have no idea what you're talking about. Fuck you. But Hestia, I think, but also, like, I mean, it's true, dude. Like, he behaves like the youngest child, like, all the fucking time. But Hestia, meanwhile, is this perfect goddess who just serves mortals in a warm and fuzzy way and no other way. She has no drama. She has nothing. She is just vitally important to the day-to-day lives because she is everyone's mother. She is just this big, warm hug in a goddess. And if that isn't this kind of concept of oldest and youngest sort of melded together to make this sort of, honestly, closest thing to perfect deity, like, I don't know what is.
Zeus is on a spree now. Next he frees Kronos' monster siblings from Tartarus, the Hecatonchires, and the Cyclops. The Cyclops are pretty killer when it comes to forging weapons. They're kind of the Gordon Ramsay of the forge, and they go to work.
That was not a good joke. Was he relevant in 2017? Is he relevant now? I've never watched a cooking show in my life. I don't know why I would have said that.
For Zeus, they create his signature lightning bolts. For Poseidon, his trident. And for Hades, his helmet of darkness. And for the ladies, well, shit all, because women had to work for their power, just like all badass females.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that was good. I made up for it.
At this point, Zeus has basically assembled an Avengers-style superhero team. We've got Zeus with his gigantic white beard, wielder of lightning bolts, Poseidon, who's getting all stabby with his trident, and Hades, who's sporting his helmet of darkness, which actually just makes him invisible. And then there's Hera, Hestia, and Demeter, who are just being powerful, badass goddesses. You can just picture them in Wonder Woman stance.
Ugh. That aged well. I was waiting for that thought to finish so that I could just say very vaguely to those who know the thing about the newest or I guess one of the newest Marvel-ish, I don't even know if it's technically Marvel, but superheroes, quote unquote superheroes, that's gonna be somehow in a movie. Like, they really haven't taken her out. Anyway, industrial military complexes, right? Late stage capitalism is doing great. The Wonder Woman joke was not irrelevant to this. Ugh.
The gods and monsters wage a war against the Titans, Kronos and his non-monster siblings. The war is called the Titanomachy, and it is not to be confused with a Clash of the Titans, because that movie didn't actually include any Titans, and don't even get me started on the Kraken. We'll leave that for when I cover Perseus. A Kraken is from Norse mythology, for God's sake.
Still a relevant comment to make, never not relevant. Fucking Krakens. Where did that, like, how why did we get there? Also, one thing that I absolutely love, and I'm not even sure if I realized it back then because now I have this like obsessive need to look into all etymological connections with Greek words, but Titanomachy just means War of the Titans. Like Maki is basically like a, not a prefix, the opposite. I'm doing well. And then to Titan, so it just like means War of the Titans. It's great. That was a really, really relevant and well said point, and I'm keeping it in as well as this.
The war went on for 10 years, and it was fought in the Greek region of Thessaly. So the gods fought with the help of the Hecatonchires, who flung stones at the Titans. And you can just imagine how many stones 300-handed dudes can throw. It's a lot of stones.
It's 900 stones. You know, with each throw, Liv. Like, I know math isn't our thing. Past Liv, I should say. I mean, present Liv math still isn't my thing. But anyway, that one was easy. 900 stones per hand each throw.
There are 2 Titans who didn't fight alongside Kronos and who instead sided with Zeus. At the risk of introducing too many names, as if I haven't done that already, they were Themis and Prometheus. I point this out because Prometheus has his own exciting adventures still to come. Let's just say when it comes to Prometheus, there's a jar and fire, and no epically disappointing alien movie in sight. The Titanomachy is one of the most ancient stories in mythology. By that I mean it takes place so far back, even in the mythology itself, that it's kind of history's history. It's myth wrapped in myth. It's the origin story of the gods who would go on to form the pantheon gods of Greek mythology, the Olympians. Almost all Greek myths revolve around the Olympians, so the Titanomachy serves as a backdrop to their rule.
What this also means is that there is like little to no detail on the Titanomachy. Like, we know they had a war. Even that Thessaly thing probably comes from a later source, I imagine. Like, we just know they fought. It was bad. One of the things that's so interesting about this whole story, you know, that I covered in that first episode is just that it really does serve as, like I said, history's history. Like this mythologizing of history, because they really did see it as this thing that was like in the distant past, both for them and the gods. Like, it had all happened already, right? Like, basically all mythology had happened already, but especially when it comes to the line of divinities, like, it wasn't like this. I think somebody asked me this, which is why I'm explaining it this way, but like, it wasn't like, you know, they thought that the Bronze Age Greeks lived under the Titans and that, you know, the archaic and classical lived under the Olympians. Like, it was always just that was the past. That was how Zeus got to be in power, and he was always the one that humans knew. And this is, of course, explained in the introduction to humanity that comes much later. But even that is like very wishy-washy as to whether that's actually, you know, how humans were quote unquote created. But mostly it's just this idea that like it was just always in the past. They were always dealing with Zeus, but they just came up with this like really amazingly epic origin.
Once it's all over, Zeus and his pals have defeated the Titans. And not one to break with tradition, Zeus imprisons them in Tartarus. This time the Hecatonchires act as guards. They get payback for being imprisoned themselves, and Zeus keeps their 300 hands hidden far away. Only one Titan escapes Tartarus, and that's Atlas. And he doesn't escape punishment entirely. He now has the privilege of holding the earth on his back, keeping us all steady. We just want to make sure he doesn't shrug, or we'll get caught up in some sort of anarchic, objectivist disaster world. That was a bad joke, but I'm going with it.
Even I don't really get that. I mean, it's an Ayn Rand joke, but that's it.
The only other children of Gaia and Uranus that escape this purge are Echidna and Typhon, and don't ask me why they escape it, because they're terrifying. Like, Zeus, you're gonna have this whole war to overthrow these pretty benign titans, but you're not gonna get rid of Echidna and Typhon? Really? Let me explain. Typhon is a monster described as having 100 snake heads writhing atop his shoulders. These heads breathe fire and make every imaginable noise. I'm saying they're described as sounding like a lion and a bear and literally every other scary noise on the planet, only the sounds are coming out of 100 snake heads atop a man's body. It's terrifying. Sometimes they even say he has wings, so that's an added bonus.
For real, though, Typhon is so fucking awesome. Like, there are so many different ways that he is described. There's always a shit ton of snakes. I'm pretty sure I did an episode on him, and it was just called, like, so many snakes. Like, it's just all snakes, but also, yeah, like, wings. Like, he was just, like, honestly, chef's kiss, perfect monster, mythological creature of death, like, no notes.
And Echidna, well, Echidna is a half snake, half woman, which frankly is more than enough to turn me off.
To clarify, like, I just really don't like snakes, but I do like them in mythology. But also I would like to say about Echidna, that Echidna is kind of described in a way that Medusa has become, like, visually depicted in the last 100 or so years. Like, I don't know if she was depicted that way before the original Clash of the Titans, so it might be that movie's fault. But, you know, that, like, top half woman, bottom half snake that she has become, like, there is absolutely no ancient source that suggests that Medusa had a bottom half snake whatsoever. That is absolutely invented. However, conceptually, it's coming from Echidna, and, like, it's just being turned into Medusa. I'm saying the word conceptually too much. I don't know why it's in my brain. I can't stop.
Together, though, they spawn some of the most epic monsters of myth, including, but not limited to, Cerberus, who's the three-headed dog who guards the standard non-Tartarus underworld. Cerberus also stars as Fluffy in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone.
OMG, this is it. This is my chance. This is it. I don't ever want to go back into my past episodes and cut out the references to Harry Potter and that fucking bitch-ass turf. Because, you know, they existed at the time, like, this was all before. This was when she was an icon to so many of us, and when those books were, like, my entire, like, I want to say childhood, but, like, I was, like, 27 or 28 when this show started, so, you know. But, like, they meant so much to my millennial generation that I don't want to go cut that stuff out, but I do want to say, and I have said so many times since to make this fucking clear, but, like, fuck her, turfy bit, fuck turfs. I'll still say it. Trans people are wonderful, magnificent people just like everyone else, you know, or rather they're just fucking normal people living their fucking normal lives, and we all need to stop trying to tell them what they can and cannot do. Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway, there's my chance. I don't even want to say her name, but, like, you know, just fucking gross. Like, thanks for ruining your entire legacy by just being, like, a fucking awful human, right? Anyway, there's that. I've been waiting a really long time to say that in relation specifically to, like, so closely with those early episodes when she hadn't shown herself. Jesus.
Hydra, who's a many-headed serpent thing with the awesome skill of growing back 2 heads whenever you cut off one. You'll know her from Disney's animated Hercules. Old Herc had a tricky time with that one. And the Chimera, a sometimes fire-breathing lion, goat, snake monstrosity, which lent its name to the now nearly forgotten but oh so wonderful show Dark Angel. R.I.P.
This remains relevant. I stand by it. Dark Angel is nearly as good today as it was back then. Are there a couple jokes that shouldn't be jokes? Yep. Otherwise, honestly, fucking aged so like a fine wine. Like a fine wine.
So now we're at a point where the remaining gods are Zeus and his siblings, and they have to decide what the new world order is going to be. The 3 brothers, because ancient Greece, like every goddamn thing, was a patriarchy.
Like, I am sorry, angry men of the internet. You really listened to this first episode and you thought, I don't think she's a feminist, you know? Like, I don't think I'm going to hear any anti-man sentiments. I'll just keep listening and then review as if that I've been surprised by it.
They split up the world by drawing straws or something in that general vein. They probably didn't have straws. Zeus rules over the air and the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades is stuck with the underworld, which is why he's always pissed off.
I actually think this is really interesting because as far as I know, in terms of, very ancient sources, I would say, pre-Roman sources, there's no detail on how the three gods determined, who would get what. And it's used a lot, this idea of like drawing lots and this like idea that Hades like lost. And I really think that is a more modern invention. It seems to me that it was really this sort of inherent divine nature. There's no like Zeus wants it all and Poseidon wants the water and I really think that it was just divinely ordained, and that's how it would have been understood in the ancient world, because there was not a lot of fear of death. There was a fear of leaving your loved ones. There was a sadness associated with death. There was, certainly grief, human grief, but it's the Christian concept of hell that forces this narrative into us now, right? This idea that death is scary and bad, and you're either going to go to the bad place or the good place, But that really wasn't a thing. And so I really dislike this idea that Hades lost anything, or that Hades was somehow mad or upset at all that he was stuck, this idea that he was stuck with the underworld. Like, I really don't think that is mythologically accurate, at least in terms of, the ancient Greek concepts. I really think that it was just this sort of divine nature. He was always meant to be the king of the underworld, to be the god of the dead. That was just sort of always going to be his role. And I think it's really important to say that, because I think it really does push back against this idea that death is bad and scary, because that is so fucking Christian. Like, it's such a Christian Western idea. It really does not tie back to the ancient world, and I want to nip it in the bud. So, a lot of what I wanted to do with this episode is kind of correct things or expand upon them, just because I have grown so much and I have learned so much of the context. And I think it really adds so much to our understanding of Greek myth, and it makes it less this like modern story, and more what it really was, which was this like ancient culture, this entire way of understanding the world and divinity broadly. I just think it's so much more interesting than what we have made it into when it comes to, picking up a book that just says like the Greek myths. Like, they're great and all, but if you don't have that contextual background of like this was like 1,000 years of tradition, there are so many different versions, we have to really ignore all of these things that are coming to us through the lens of Christianity that really takes away from the ancient culture of it all. Anyway, I just love pointing that shit out, so thanks. Very quick amendment, because I checked my work after recording this. In the Iliad, they do say that they pulled lots, but that still doesn't suggest that Hades lost, that Hades was like upset.
As for the women folk, well, they get some decent roles, unlike the mortal women of ancient Greece, who had it pretty fucking shitty. Hera becomes Zeus's sister wife, because like I said, Rhea and Kronos were not the only married siblings, and she's the goddess of women and marriage, a bit ironically, as we'll come to see. Hestia is the goddess of the hearth and fire. She keeps to herself. She's pretty awesome. Demeter's the goddess of the harvest and agriculture, and she's famous mostly for being a super pissed mom at one point. Again, we'll get there. From there, the pantheon of the Olympians is rounded out by Aphrodite, who I mentioned earlier, she of the castration foam, and a select few of Zeus's many, many children. His children deserve stories of their own. We'll just say I plan to devote an entire episode to the slut that is Zeus. Irony of ironies, given his wife is the goddess of marriage, like I said. Hera gets the short end of the stick, to be sure. For now, I'll just say that of Zeus's children, those who become Olympians are Apollo and Artemis, who are twins. Apollo is the god of music, truth, prophecy, light, and the sun. Artemis is the badass virgin goddess of the hunt. And then there's Athena, also badass virgin. She's the goddess of wisdom, war, craft, and diplomacy. It's war and craft, but also warcraft, I guess.
And here is where I remind you all that the concept of quote-unquote virgin is, again, what? What's that? It's Christian! So the idea of looking at Athena and Artemis through this lens of virginity is through a lens of Christianity. Whereas in truth, in this ancient Greek world, the word is parthenos. It means unmarried woman. They did not conceptualize this idea of virginity as like a physical thing in your body. Like, good, it literally doesn't matter. It's not a thing. It doesn't matter. Ugh. Anyway, they did not conceptualize it like that. And so what virginity was just unmarried. So, but also there is, a lot to be said about how women couldn't marry other women. And so like, absolutely they were fucking but they could still be called virgins, I think that's probably true of Artemis in terms of like, if we want to dive into, how we could view her sexuality in the modern world. Same with Athena, but I like to think that she's more asexual. There's a lot more evidence that Artemis is like into the nymph ladies. But I just really do want to emphasize that, because this is something that I said a lot in the early days of the podcast, again, because I did not have the background, the context. It is so important in understanding this stuff, and which is completely lacking when you are just trying to learn this on your own, like unless you are coming to sources that explain it. But so often the commercial sources that you're going to find like don't, because it's not easy to get into that detail, which is where I come in. So just this reminder, this idea of virginity, in the Western context is so inherently tied to Christianity and is so gross. It's so gross, right? Because it is like never really applicable to men. Like it doesn't matter. Whereas women have this like bodily thing that they like, So unmarried means unmarried woman. Parthenos.
Ares is the god of war, who is not super popular among his brethren. He's a bit of a loose cannon, really. Hermes is a messenger god and all-around trickster. He's basically the same cutie patootie from the animated Hercules. He's a little crazy. He wears a helmet and sandals, both with little wings so he can fly around. He carries around the caduceus staff that ultimately comes to represent medicine, and is another connection to Dark Angel. Again, R.I.P.
So much to say here. One, absolutely still think that he is the cutie patootie little weirdo from Disney's Hercules. Definitely still relevant. Two, he does carry around the caduceus. No, Liv. No, past Liv. It does not. Well, I guess it does come to symbolize medicine, but it shouldn't. And let me tell you why. So, there are two ancient Greek staff-like things that involve snakes. And both have come to represent medicine in the modern Western world in different ways. But one is wrong and one is right. And nobody really seems to be keeping track. So the caduceus that Hermes carried around has absolutely nothing to do with medicine in the ancient world. It is the one that has the like kind of thing at the top and two snakes wrapped around it, okay? Hermes is a god of commercialism. So it is particularly relevant when countries like the United States use it to describe medicine. The one that's actually supposed to be a symbol for medicine is just a staff, like a very simple walking stick kind of staff with one snake. That is the symbol for Asclepius. It's what he carried around. He is the god of health, of medicine. And thus, that is the correct ancient Greek symbol for it, not the caduceus. Important. Dark Angel, still relevant. Again.
Hephaestus, who's the god of the forge and husband of Aphrodite, though she isn't a big fan of his, she is one of the few who takes a real shine to her brother Ares. And Dionysus, who's the god of the vine, wine, and general debauchery, and he eventually takes Hestia's spot in the Olympian order when she becomes sick of the other Olympians' bullshit. Like I said, she's kind of a secret badass. She's not willing to take the petty squabbles of the Olympians, and she just gets sick of it at one point and leaves. It's awesome.
Okay, again, kind of like the drawing lots thing, like this is not actually something that is ever described in the surviving sources, which I just find really interesting. Like, it's more just that, like, over the breadth of time that is Greek mythology, like, sometimes Hestia is an Olympian, and sometimes she's not really explicitly one. It never lessens her overall importance. She was so fucking important with her hearths. Like, it's how people kept themselves warm and they ate. It was like the family like emblem kind of thing. But she just sometimes isn't an Olympian. And so like I really do think though, like if we were to give it a story, it's that she was like, fuck you guys, I don't want any of this. And she just left. But it is not explicit in any sources.
The Olympians, now having established themselves as the ruling order of gods, they settle atop Mount Olympus, and hence their name. From there, as we'll find out, they watch over the humans from afar, sometimes jumping in to start or stop wars, or to, frankly, just spread their godly seed.
Okay, but for real, though, like, such an accurate statement. And also, like, weirdly relevant for a novel that I'm working on. Yeah, it's early days, but relevant.
A general rule, though, the Olympians are not able to show themselves to humans in their true god form. A human can't survive it, so typically they find creative ways of interacting. Therein lies the fun of Greek myths. To what lengths will the gods go to have sex with mortals? We will find out.
The simpler days when I thought that there were any kind of general rules in Greek mythology. There are no rules. There is no canon. There is no right or wrong myth except for when it doesn't exist in the sources at all, and then it is wrong. Like Medusa being actually dangerous to humans. But no, like, there is no rules. There are no rules, rather. So it's really a matter of, like, sometimes there are stories where a god can't show himself to a woman, and, you know, it makes for disastrous results, like Zeus and Semele for the birth of Dionysus, or, you know, Cupid and Psyche, but that's very Roman. And also not irrelevant to the thing that I just said. Still, this idea that there are any kind of rules, no, like what it does is just kind of explain all those times when Zeus was like, I'm gonna fuck a woman as a shower of gold, or, well, I think in order to, let's be honest, assault this woman, I'm going to appear as a swan. You know, really all it does is like a kind of account for that. Or like, you know, he did abduct and assault the boy Ganymede as an eagle. Like, there are no rules. There are just these stories. And then I think sometimes people who retell them kind of invent these rules. Because it is interesting, you know, to have a kind of rule, to have a canon, to have like a kind of structure. And, you know, as I talked about, you know, in that same episode I was talking about earlier with Machi, like, there is structure, but it is not so cut and dry and clean, you know, as the retelling books often want you to believe. It's really just, you know, it's a lot more kind of deep and existential. But again, listen to those episodes. Still, there are no rules. And honestly, like, isn't that why we all still love it? It's certainly why I love it after 7 years. Because there are no rules.
And there it is, the beginning of everything. It will only get crazier from here. Thanks so much for listening to this inaugural episode of Let's Talk About Myths, baby. My name is Liv, and I love this shit.
Okay, honestly, that was really fun. I hope you guys liked this episode. You know, it's something where, like, I mean, I'm not running out of content. I don't want to scare anyone, but like, I'm definitely running out of, you know, the myths that we think of, the sort of standard concepts, oh my God, of myth. Because I've just told them all. But I really like this idea of revisiting things, not by replaying it, you know, directly, but by kind of analyzing it and breaking down, you know, what I might have been wrong about because I didn't have the context, what I might be able to expand upon now and add more information. Obviously, you know, in cases where, like Theseus or Perseus, where I have already redone those stories in greater detail, like I'm not going to do that with those episodes. But if there are other ones, you know, that maybe don't need to be fully redone, or maybe they're very popular early episodes like this one. This episode gets like 150,000 downloads like a month. Like, which compared to my other episodes is like fucking just ridiculous. But yeah, you know, I just want to like kind of look at it a little closer. So if you liked this, please let me know in whatever way that you can. If you're listening on Spotify, there will be an option for you to let me know whether this is something you'd like me to keep doing, because it was really fun for me. Also, just generally, you know, this was so much fun. Thank you all for listening. I really hoped you like it. I needed this, honestly, and it actually did. Even though I was kind of like wild, just kind of my brain is sort of a mess today because of ADHD. You really need like structure, and so having like a day and a half completely like taken away in this very stressful way of like I had no idea when I was going to get home because flights just kept getting canceled. And what's, you know, the most is that like I flew to this place with fucking winter, and I come from a place without winter, so it's just incredibly annoying. So I came back to like 0 snow and really warm sunny weather when there was like 6 feet across the country. In any case, I really needed this, and I, you know, even on top of after this ridiculous weekend, you know, obviously in as you've heard, you know, in past things I've recorded, I've been having a lot of trouble just being happy, let alone just like finding the thrill in this again, just because I've been so bogged down by my life. And this was really everything I needed. It like just really. So thank you all so much for listening. Let's Talk About Myths, Baby is written and produced by me, Liv Albert, and God, it hasn't been for 7 fucking years. Like, even just, oh my gosh, listening to how I spoke back then, and it's really fun. And for all I complain about how that episode gets all those downloads, and then so often people judge me based on it, and I'm like, just listen to something more recent. Like, I've really come a long way, and I'm so proud of what I am now. And anyway, but I am so proud of that first episode because it is what led me to be the person and the creator that I am now. And like, fuck, it's really cool. Yeah, I really needed that just for my own mental health. So thank you. Michaela Smith is the Hermes to my Olympians. Gods, could you imagine? Like, I just want to tell past Liv that I'd be reading credits 7 years later, where I employ 2 people. And like angry leftist in me too. Like, just like I get to employ people and make their jobs fun and well paid and low stress. And as a millennial who has worked some shit jobs and like shit jobs that led me to be creating this, it means a whole lot that I get to do that. So like, I mean, thank you to Michaela for letting me pay you, I guess. Like, you're the best. Michaela's my assistant producer. Laura Smith is the production assistant and audio engineer. Laura is amazing. Both of them, it's just so fucking fun. Select music in this episode was by the wonderful Luke Chaos. I also got to pay somebody to make me custom music. What is my life now? The podcast is part of the iHeart Podcast Network and still retains complete independence. I make what I want to make, as you can tell by this slightly unhinged episode. But you know what, guys? They pay me to give you all this free content. And how fucking cool is that? Help me continue bringing you the world of Greek mythology and the ancient Mediterranean by becoming a patron, where you'll get bonus episodes and more. And I will be returning to my Patreon now that I've kind of got my shit back together. If you want to subscribe, you know, for all that iHeart does pay me, I also am afraid of capitalism. So if you want to help me out and make sure that if something ever blows up or I make them angry, you know, I'll still keep going, visit me over on Patreon. I do consider it to be more of a donation-based system than for bonus content, because I give 2 free episodes of the show every week. I simply can't create more. So, but if you want to help me create the free ones, head on over there. Visit patreon.com/mythsbaby for that. The link is also in the description. And, I meant to say this. I meant to say this at the very end of the recording, or the earlier episode, rather. I think I said I love this shit, like, on a whim. I think I just was like, oh, this is a thing, because it's true. Because I actually find myself just, like, saying it in conversation. Like, when I was in Rome with my friend Jenny from Ancient History Fangirl, we both kept saying it, and I was like, oh my god, we're both just, like, using what has become my catchphrase, which is, like, so wild and weird, but it's just, like, what I say about the ancient world, because, like, I have no better way of phrasing how much I fucking love it. And really, truly, this episode has just helped me get back to that. So thank you all so much for coming along on the ride, and I hope you liked it. And even if you liked it and you don't want more, like, that's fine too. Either way, it really helped me. So thank you all. I'm Liv, and I love this shit.